You're watching ITG Clips.
All right, Jed, final thing on the agenda here for this episode 238 of In the Gun, and that is, of course, the Spring Showcase, our thoughts from the new iteration of the spring game, if you will, this past Saturday at Mountaineer Field at Milan Puskar Stadium. First time in the second Rich Rodriguez era for WVU. And this one was certainly different. We talked about this on the preview last week. If you're anybody who, keeps your finger on the pulse of these things, these games are now different all across college football because of the transfer portal. So I don't think as much like kind of maybe hard-hitting X's and O's and analysis and some things like that we would have from the past, but still some thoughts, certainly. Still some fun that was had out there, certainly. I'm sure by now everyone has seen the videos of Rich Rodriguez climbing up in the stands and letting some fans call plays. I tell you what, if that's not a good reason to get you to come out in the future, maybe you'll get to call a couple plays with the ball coach. But still things to glean, still things from to deuce as always, even if it was really just kind of more of a glorified practice in a way. Jed, I know you were on the sideline. I was there, but I was wrangling my almost 2-year-old and my 3.5-year-old. So I was half paying attention, half being dad. So I'll let you kind of lead here. But just any observations or anything you wanted to talk about specifically from the spring showcase.
Well, yeah, let's start with this. I was down on the field in pregame, and first of all, great turnout. Ton of former players. Ton of former
A lot
players.
of
You
former
talk about a
players.
who's who.
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere I look, you couldn't swing a cat by the tail without hitting, some former all-conference Mountaineer, right? From generations past, from Daryl Talley to
Yep.
Grant Wiley. I mean, you name it. And so Rich saw me standing behind the end zone, so he came up to chat and he was asking about the radio. I said, I don't have a mic. I said, this is a freebie. We're not even broadcasting today. I'm just watching,
I'm
right?
just
I'm
watching.
just kind of hanging out. So I don't even have an assignment here. So I kind of just worked my way, and I was eager to thinking of all the firsts. This was his first time in somewhat of a simulated game situation to talk to the kids in the locker room before we went out. And okay, it was kind of weird and surreal there to watch him address the team for the first time. And he said, "Look, I'm not going to get into the whole pregame speech. You guys will hear that later." And even then, I got chills, thinking, "Oh, I know it's coming. I know it's coming. Here we go, Robert Morris. We're going to hear us strap it on. Here we go." I could already think about it in the locker room. But I'm just making my rounds in the locker room. It was very laid back, subdued. And so, I mean, we'll start with the quarterbacks. I was talking to Nico in the locker room, and he said, "Well," he said, Rhett told me, he said, I'm probably gonna get 10 to 15 reps, okay." And I said, "All right, I'm preaching to the choir. I know." I said, "But the two words that come to mind: protect the ball and be productive. Don't protect it at the expense of production. Just protect the ball and be productive." I said, "Which I know you'll do. You do those two things, all 15 or so of those reps will count." And boy, did he. I mean, he came out in spades. Second play of the scrimmage, goes vertical to Cam Vaughn. It's a nice, that's our release vertical, deep shot. Uh, and then performed later in the scrimmage as well. What happened with Nico was he went with that first possession and really didn't come back in until we were on the fringe
Yeah.
red zone, type situation. And he made a throw. I told him when he came off the field, they were trying to go the double move to get open in the end zone, and the DB didn't bite on the double move. You saw when Nico pump fake, so the safety didn't bite, so he had to come back down to the drop down, which was it was to the field. And it was about a 10-yard comeback, and he threw that thing. His ball placement on that thing was time capsule worthy. I mean, it was low and away, because what you're thinking under those circumstances, give him a chance, but don't give the DB any chance to make a play on it. And boy, did he. I mean, he put that
Mm-hmm.
thing low and away. The kid makes a perfect catch. So Nico came off after the series over, because the first series they got a field goal. And I said,
Yep.
"Hey, you got points. Let's start with that. You got points. That matters." And when he made that throw on that comeback later in the scrimmage, he came off, and I looked at him. I just gave him a fist bump, and I said, "Low and away." And he said, "And with somebody in my face." So he was feeling it. But I'll say this: Nico finished the spring, in a very strong stature. He played very well on Thursday. He was kind of almost in a zone to some extent. I'll start with him because he got the first reps, and then you go to Jalen. And look, none of these kids really did anything throughout the course of the spring. The four names that I'm going to talk about, none of them did anything. Say, I wouldn't count him in. No, I mean, all of them were productive. It's just a matter of consistency. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
what you would expect. You want to ease out the peaks and the troughs, the peaks and the valleys, right? Uh, And Jalen can make some things happen, and he did in the game. You saw some of that showcase last Saturday, and you've seen it throughout the course of some of these scrimmage settings in practice. Um, and then you jump to Max Brown, and I heard some people saying after the game, "Well, hey, based on what I saw, Max Brown should be the starter." I'm like, well, first of all, I'm glad to hear that kind of chatter. All right,
Sure, sure.
based on the indictments people were tossing at him coming out of that Charlotte situation, which he was just in a horrible offensive ecosystem in Charlotte. Again, there was a reason Florida signed him, that he played for the Gators before that, but went to Charlotte. That offense surrounding him was just wretched. They had a lot of problems. Uh, and he had his moments in the spring, but the reason he kind of seemed to feel, it felt like he stood out a bit. Do I have to tell you? Right? He was live.
Yep.
Jalen and Nico had black jerseys on.
Yep.
That matters. I can't even quantify how much that matters, right? If you go down the depth chart, 1 and 2 weren't live. I'm not even saying one. It's like 1 and 2. It's 1 and 1A. However you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Max Brown wasn't. He was live, so he
Correct.
could shake loose and make things happen on that
Correct.
3rd and 8, make that guy miss. Whereas Nico wasn't allowed to do that. Jalen wasn't allowed to do that. So to Max's credit, he made the most of those opportunities. But remember, he was the only one afforded those opportunities. Nico, Jalen weren't. And then, you look at our freshmen. We talked about Scotty Fox on here a lot. We're big Scotty Fox fans. He didn't disappoint. He made some things happen in some tough situations, and his athleticism is exciting. There's a lot that he brings to the table. I think when you move beyond that, again, when you look at the running back position, we got the big boy out of Northern Iowa. You're hoping
Hmm.
Ty Edwards really, really settles in and gets comfortable. Jaheim was kind of shelved for the better part of the spring for obvious reasons. You know what you got with Jaheim. That's your feature, your bell cow, your explosive playmaker. I mean, I could see and I've said this multiple times. I could see, Jaheim fitting into the system to be almost like Avon with speed. Avon without the knee injury that he suffered as a senior in high school. That's I could see Jaheim almost fitting that way. Uh, Now, a couple of those running backs didn't make it. They were cut. Okay, but Hubbard, he's still sticking around. He's acquitted himself pretty well throughout the course of the spring. Uh, so he has some potential, but I do think we're going to be in the market for another running back to push the kids in that room. That's one of the rooms that we'll be dipping into the portal, I think. I was satisfied with what I saw with the first unit on the O line. Um, that they're very hard pressed with just 15 practices to come together and gel.
Yeah.
From you're being scattered all across dust and God's creation to come together with no background, no continuity. Landon's the only holdover in that unit, and you got 4 starters around you that really didn't know each other until a few months ago. They'd never even met. So to ask them to come together like glue and really flourish under Jack McNeil, I think they took some strides in the spring, and it crystallized in the spring game. I think part of the reason that you saw some production from the run game started at the point of attack. So I liked what I saw there. We do need some depth. And Rich has talked about this a host of times.
Hmm.
Not just depth in the event that somebody gets hurt, but also depth. You want quality depth that can push for time and really, it's the old metal makes metal stronger and sharper. You want some kids that can push those 5 kids that really were kind of the starters by the end of the spring, because you want 7 or 8 of those kids and let them push each other and make each
Yeah.
other better. So that's where you want to get. We saw some changes in the tight end room that might have surprised some people, but I think we also have some kids that are potential playmakers in the tight end room. And then when you move out on the perimeter, or if you want to include the slots and move to the receivers, what we saw in the spring game, we saw Cam Vaughn doing Cam Vaughn things. He was making some plays. He's legit. I mean, he's a legit split in X, the skill set that you're going to look for that type of player. Oftentimes, you're going to be running the formation away from him. He'll be singled up in coverage. You want a guy who can make plays and make the most of those opportunities when he is singled up in coverage. He did it at Jack State as a freshman, and he's done it through the spring here. I think of that's a kid who's going to provide some consistent production. And then when you jump to the other side, Wes, I'll tell you what, by the end of the spring, Jaden Bray was starting to look like what you kind of hoped Jaden Bray would look like when we got him from Stillwater last year,
Hmm.
but for the injuries. Because if you remember, he struggled with a couple different injuries through most of last year. But when he did play, Cincinnati comes to mind, he made things happen. I mean, he is a formidable kid out on the perimeter. He's a 50-50 monster, and he made a play in the end zone in that scrimmage. You saw it. Great catch. That was the definition of a 50-50 ball. So, again, some of the other new faces on the perimeter, it's nice to have Preston back as well. You're going to need some numbers on the perimeter. But when you move into the slot, we don't have a lot of size, but I think we got three potential playmakers. You know what you got in Rodney Gallagher. Okay. And then we got the transfer and the Bowie kid from Jack State. We got Singleton from Eastern Michigan, who Rich saw and faced when he was at Jack State. I think all three of those kids are playmakers. Singleton, not that big of a kid, shifty, playmaker in space. Same thing with Bowie, a Martinsburg kid that played at Jack State. So there are some weapons in that room, but we need numbers in that room. And that's another thing we're going to address in the portal. That's what I see on the offensive side of the room. I'm going to toss to you, and then we'll talk about the defense.
Yeah, listen, the hardest thing to do now, and this is, I mean, a good follow-up on kind of a lot of the things we talked about in this episode, is to be confident, I think, confident in depth, right? You could still be confident in your starters, but to be confident in depth is tough in this portal era. Heck, it's tough if you're Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to ITG Clips and In the Gun podcast for more WVU football content. Watch the whole podcast episode by clicking the link above or in the description.